O my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great cause. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavor, and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge, and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily thou art the mighty, the powerful, the omnipotent. My name is Jack Edwards McCants. I was born in Dallas, Texas. And I was born there, as far as I know, the coldest day in their history is 8 degrees below zero the night I was born.
What year was that?
1930, January 1930, yeah. I have a brother, he's passed on. He became Baha'i the same day I did. My father was William Asbury McCants, and he was a paint salesman for over 40 years. And then he took a job with the state of Texas and worked for them until he passed away. My mother was from a little town in Coleman, Georgia, it's down in the corner of the state, and he met her when he was selling paint and traveling from New Mexico to Georgia. And he met her over there in a little town and fell in love, and they got married. And here I am. Daisy Dean Walton. Her last name, they were a descendant of the man who settled that state, actually, of Georgia. Mainly, he was one of the main settlers and so forth. But my father's family, my middle name Edwards, they were the descendants of this famous Methodist. I don't know, I think he's Methodist, be some kind of Methodist, Jonathan Edwards, who traveled the whole East Coast on a horse. And he was, so his family comes from him. Well, I was raised in 2 small towns in Texas, Corsicana, Texas, until I was maybe 10, 11 years old. Then I moved to Palestine, Texas, and I grew up there. And we lived on a small farm. We had 62 acres, and I grew up, it's funny, but full way I remember, I had to milk 3 cows every morning, every night, had to feed 36 hogs, and we had guineas. Most people don't know what a guinea is. We had a lot of guineas and turkeys and chickens. And so my job was taking care of all that bunch of animals, and it was tough because I had to go to school and do that, and I worked a little job in a shoe store in the afternoon before I could even get home. So it kept me busy, really. I was really busy. I wasn't free like most high school kids. I got off early from school, and I went to work at the shoe store, and then had to go home and milk those cows and so forth. I was very, very busy, but I enjoyed raising vegetables and flowers, so it wasn't bad. Still enjoy that. Yeah. Well, as I'm saying, I got out early from school, so I didn't have the time to play football, which I would love to have done. I just didn't have any time off at all. But I was treasurer for my senior class because they thought I knew something about business because I was working all the time. It was funny, but I had a lot of friends in high school and still have a few that are still alive because, I'm old. I'm 92 years old. But it's awkward being the last leaf on the tree. You don't like that. But I just lost a close friend I was in high school with a few weeks ago. But I enjoyed high school very, very much. And I had a lot of close friends that I still associated with all my life. Off and on, I'd meet them and go back up to Palestine and talk with them. Well, we sold a lot of watermelons and we sold a lot of sweet potatoes. But other than that, it was not the main income of the family. It was just something my father liked to do, and he liked to raise a lot of it. So, and I was not able to be in town much because I had to be taking care of all those animals and chickens and stuff. And it was busy. My family had a background of going to Methodist church. And I went to a small Methodist church in the northern part of Corsicana, an area called Zion's Rest. But no, they were not particularly churchgoers. My father would say a prayer for every meal, like we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He always had a prayer, he said. And so I was raised in a religious atmosphere in that sense, but we're not big churchgoers, no. Well, I didn't know anything about it until I got to be a teenager. And I fell in love with a girl, and she was going to the church, so I went to the church. That's simple. And there I became a very close friend of the minister, H.E. Floyd. In fact, he's buried in a Methodist cemetery in East Texas. But he was a wonderful man, and I followed him in a job I had, even though later he was in a job in Port Arthur as a minister. But he was a wonderful, wonderful man and helped me get through college. He helped me get some money to scholarship-wise. And you never forget someone like that. I just never had any great urge of anything until going to that little Methodist church in Palestine, Texas. They have a term, I don't know if it's still used in the church, being called to preach. And I did feel the urge to be a minister while I was going to that church. And that's why I went to theology school. I guess my closest friend, we had a small house right behind our house, and a veteran of the First World War, Sam Watson. He was a black man from Henderson, Texas. He was my closest friend growing up. I have his picture on my desk at home. I had a dog that I was close to, and then Sam Watson. And they were my two closest friends growing up. And I had two friends. One played football for a little town south of Palestine, and the other one played football for Palestine. And they would both come down to Sam's house, and we'd sit out there, and he'd tell these wild stories and all about France and stuff when he was a soldier and stuff. But we loved him. He was just a wonderful, wonderful human being, one of the best people I ever knew in my life. And I grew up with him. He stayed with us for maybe 10 years. I still miss him, to be quite honest with you. After all these years, I have his pictures I see on my desk at home. I never knew his family. I don't know anything about his family. He didn't talk about it. I don't know if he was close to him or not. He had been married, but I think his wife had died when I knew him. And I don't think he had any children, as far as I know. But he was the best storyteller you can imagine, you know. And he had seen a lot in his life that, you know, I didn't know anything about. We used to go to the movie every Saturday. We'd walk to town, walk back. And because those days, African Americans had to sleep upstairs to watch the show. He'd go in and go upstairs in the balcony, and I would go downstairs, and then we'd see the show, and then we'd walk back home talking about what we saw. I went to a junior college in Athens, Texas, called at that time Henderson County Junior College. They changed the name now to Trinity Valley College. But they had a wonderful teacher there teaching chemistry. His name was Cade, Dr. Cade, and his wife taught speech. But he was one of the most wonderful people I ever knew in my life. He encouraged me a lot. It meant a lot to me because I didn't know anybody like that, you know, my childhood. And so he encouraged me my 2 years in that junior college. And then I went to Stephen F. Austin State College because I had a friend who was back from serving in the Army, and he had finished junior college when I did. So we drove all the way from Palestine to Nacogdoches every day to class till I got out of, I think I liked the summer, and I had a job by then in Beaumont, and I'd drive up there on weekends. I had a couple of classes, then I graduated.
So what did you study at
History.
Study history? What were your intentions with the history degree?
I thought I might teach, yeah. My father was a politician, very much so. He ran for state senate. I think he came in second, and then the man that beat him became one of his closest friends, Clay Cotton from Palestine, who was an attorney, I think. And then he got my father a good job with the state of Texas. And my father traveled all of East Texas from Port Arthur to Nacogdoches. And then he became ill, very ill, and had to retire, and I took his job. And then while I was on the road one time, it froze in Palestine, and someone poisoned our dog, which I mentioned. I love that dog. My father loved it. My father was holding that dog in his arms, and he slipped on the ice and fell and hit his head, and we had to put him in the hospital for several weeks. And so it changed my life because I had taken his job And by that time, they moved me to Beaumont, Texas. And I was working in Beaumont, and I had to drive from there to Nacogdoches for the last couple of classes I had to finish school, and I did that. But it was awful because, I really loved my dad, and then he never got over that. And I came home one weekend, and he had fallen, and they took him to the hospital. He died that afternoon. And so it changed my whole life from then on. Well, I took a good job because I had that job. I was able to contact the right people. I took a good job with the federal government. And I helped start a government program at that time called Job Corps. I helped start it. And I traveled 8 states constantly for the U.S. government. And it was a great learning experience for me, meeting politicians, obviously, and people in that business. And then they moved me briefly to Nashville, Tennessee, which is, the country music capital of the world. And so I was exposed to that. And actually, most people think of that. They know Nashville because of country music, but it's also the center of the state government. And also they have a lot of economic stuff going on there. So it was a very interesting experience for me living that. I didn't live there long, but I met one of my first Baha'is there, Hedi Ahmadiyya, who was a great counselor for a while in South America. And we both moved down there briefly I was in British Honduras. Well, I was called to preach, as they say. And to do that, I had several small churches. My minister, H.E. Floyd, took me down to Houston, Texas, where I met Bishop A. Frank Smith, who was here in Houston, a wonderful, wonderful man. And I was ordained as a minister right here in Houston, Texas, ordained to preach.
How old were you when that?
I guess 22, something like that. Yeah, I think that's about right. Anyway, and in order to get ahead as a minister, you have to go to theology school. As a Methodist minister. So the Methodist ministry theology school is at Southern Methodist University. Perkins School of Theology, a man named Perkins. I think he was from Wichita Falls, Texas, but he funded that seminary. And the people there were extremely kind to the students. So I had a good experience there, except I didn't find myself being fulfilled in what I wanted in religion. It just was all, from my viewpoint, this is just Jack talking, but there's a long road from the head to the heart. And most of what I found there was head religion, not heart religion. And I like both of it. I like good head and good heart all combined. And they didn't satisfy me, so I was very unhappy. And so I left school for a while, and I decided that's when I went to Florida State University. And there's a famous historian at that time, Weymouth T. Jordan. He was a wonderful man, a Dr. Beck. And they treated me with great respect, but I had only been there a year. I had gotten married and bought a little house there. And then all of a sudden I was drafted. I wasn't expected to be drafted into the Army. And so I went in the Army as a conscientious objector. They permitted me to do that as a Methodist. And so as a conscience, it means you don't believe in carrying weapons. And so I was drafted. They sent me to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. They immediately transferred me then, because I was conscious, to this fort out here near Temple, Texas, Fort Hood. And they trained all conscientious objectors there. And while I was there, I met my first Baha'i, Stephen Soom. I still communicate with him. He lives up in Wisconsin somewhere. But he's a wonderful man. He gave me this book, God Passes By forget his name. Baha'u'llah in the New Year, and those books. He gave me those books. But anyway, I didn't like the cover of the book, so I didn't read it. It's that simple. I'm sensitive to that kind of stuff, and they've had an ugly cover on it as far as I'm concerned. But I kept the book. And so after I got out of Fort Jackson, South Carolina, they shipped me to Korea. To a little fort over there near Dothan, Alabama. And, it's not little now, but it was then. And then they shipped me after about 2 months to Korea. And I got there just as the war ended. and I was in headquarters company of the 24th Infantry Division. And I saw stuff there I had never seen before as a human being. And I met some of the best people I met in my life, and I met some of the meanest that ever walked this earth. And two of them were in my own outfit. They were not the enemy. But, I mean, they just like to kill people, that's all. I'm not going to put a pretty picture to it. But most of the people were very good. And we were there in tents for a while, and eventually we built little huts to live in before I left there. And they let me do something I was very pleased to do. We had a flagpole out near where we were, and I planted little flowers around that. I'm still grateful I did that. Only flowers I could see at that time up in that part of Korea. But I learned to love the Christians in South Korea. They were wonderful people, man. You have no idea how much it meant to a soldier to be treated with such respect and courtesy. It meant so much to me. And so while there, I was exposed to the Army, and I was exposed to some bad people. I saw some stuff I'd never been exposed to in my life. It really upset me very much. And I came back to Texas after I was released, and went back to my home there in Florida State in Tallahassee, and I sold that home. As I said, I was married, and we had two little boys, and I moved back to take a church in Grand Saline, Texas, which is not too far from Dallas. And I was a youth director there for a while. And I decided I would go back and take another semester and see if I could pick up where I left off at SMU School of Theology, Perkins School of Theology. And they were so kind to me. They let me stay in the dorm when I was there during the week, and my wife kept the kids over in Grand Saline. I drove for a while, driving back and forth, but it was just too much. And finally, at the end of the semester, there were two famous theologians at that time. Bultmann was one, I forget the name of the other. But they asked me to write, what I thought of them. We had studied them in class. And I wrote the answer to the little blue books they had that you wrote answers to questions with your final exam at the mid-semester. And I wrote an answer to let them know I knew what they taught. And in my last sentence, I said, I don't believe a word of it. And so this man, Dr. Gailey, was passing out as I recall it was him, passing out the exams after they were graded. Mine, he held till last. And other people had left the room. He said, Mr. McCants, can I speak to you? He looked at me with such kind eye. He said, Mr. McCants, I don't think there's a place here for you anymore. And I said, I agree with you. Now, you'd think they'd just kick me out of school. They didn't. I stayed in the dormitory. And my wife left me then because she had been a missionary up in Alaska before I married her. So she left me and took the two little boys with her. I didn't see them for 10, 11 years. The children, she left them. I didn't know it, but she went to Hawaii, had a friend over there. Met someone, divorced me, met someone over there and married him. So I was going through this agony, loss of my children, my family, and still hurt very badly from my experience in Korea. In fact, I still dream about it every now and then. I saw stuff I'd never seen before. I was not used to. And so while one day I was in this dormitory, they let me stay in for a semester. I got a job at a bakery, loading bakery trucks at night, and then come back home and stay in the dormitory in the daytime. And I was desperate. I'll never forget this, late in April. And I had a friend who had been in the tank corps over in Korea too. His name was Harry Craig, and he got interested in Baha'i. I heard about it before I did. Although I had heard about it and gotten that book when I was in training. So we went to a little fireside, and I got interested in it a little bit. And I didn't know what to do. And so I don't know, I just knelt down on my knees and prayed my heart out and said, God, I'm going to get the Bible and open it, put my finger on whatever verse it falls on. I will give you my life, I will do. And I opened it, Acts 10:20. And the verse said, arise get thee down and go with them, doubting nothing in your heart, for I have sent them. Well, I got up straight from there and I went to the Baha'is and met this wonderful Baha'i named Howard Menking. He and his wife Joanne had been Knights of Baha'u'llah in the Cape Verde Islands off the coast of Africa. He was a wonderful human being. And then they had this wonderful woman, Nancy Dobbins, married to Gordon Dobbins over in Fort Worth. And she would come over for this little fireside they had for me, if you can believe that. And then there was a Cherokee Indian guy and his wife, Speck and Eileen Squires. And those four people would come down for a little fireside for me. And they were the happiest people I'd ever been around in my life. Now, I don't know what that would mean to a lot of people, but when you're suffering a lot of grief and loss and hurt, to be around genuinely happy people, it means everything to you. And so I was so grateful to just being around those people. And so after I put my finger on that verse, I got up and I drove over to Howard's house. And he came outside. They were having a little LSA meeting in University Park in Dallas. And Howard came in. I told Howard what I'd done. Well, he thought I was a nut, you know. So I said, I was embarrassed. So I said, Howard, go get the Bible. I'll show you. And he went in the house, and as God is my witness, standing on his front door porch, right to the doorway. I opened the Bible again, put my finger on that same verse, Acts 10:20. Arise, get thee down, and go with them, doubting nothing in your heart. For I have said, well, he became a believer too. So I enrolled in the faith there then, but I had serious questions about it. And I'll tell you why. I had a wonderful teacher from Lucknow College in that theology school. His name was E. Ahmad Shah. He was from Lucknow College in India. And he had been so hurt in his college by the Muslims in India. I guess it's 59. Yeah, 1959. Yeah, 1959. That's the summer I became a Baha'i in June. So I had these questions because Ahmad Shah had brainwashed all of us about Muslims because he had been so hurt by them at that little Christian college, Lucknow College in India. And so I had these real reservations about Muhammad just because of what I would have been taught in theology school. And that was hard for me because Baha'is accept, as you know, Muhammad as a prophet of God. And I didn't know what to do about it. I couldn't shake it. And when I became a Baha'i, Horace Holly, who was secretary of the NSA at that time, would not accept my enrollment that summer because I was still an ordained minister, and I was. So I wrote to this bishop here in Houston, Bishop A. Frank Smith, and he wrote the most sweet, loving letter you can imagine. It's on file at the NSA, encouraging me and saying he hoped that I'm not, making a mistake and that I could be happy with what I found and so forth. But he was so kind and loving. So I didn't have that hanging over my head, but I couldn't shake this business about Islam. And so I was praying and praying and praying my heart out. And, I forget the exact quote in the Bible where Christ was talking to some of his disciples. They were having a problem. So he said, this kind of demon only comes out with much fasting and prayer. As I recall, that's the basic statement he made. So I fasted for 2 weeks. And I prayed. I just drank just several glasses of water a day and working at that post office at night. I had taken a job at the post office at night and prayed for 2 weeks. And I had a dream. And it didn't make any sense to me. It says, Ta Benrock Gabriel. It meant nothing to me. I had this dream, and there was a big white banner, and these words, Ta Benrock Gabriel, were on that banner. Ta Benrock Gabriel. I'll never forget it. At the end of holding that banner on the end was Gabriel. He was just like a shining light, this being. I still can see it in my mind. And I didn't know what it meant. It didn't make any sense to me. So they wanted someone to hold the assembly. They'd lost a member in Fort Worth. And it was about equal distance from the post office where I was working to drive to Fort Worth, or from where I was living outside of Dallas there in University Park. So I moved over to Fort Worth to help them hold their assembly. And while there, I decided, well, I didn't know much about the Baha'i faith, and I ordered every single Baha'i book that was in print at that time, that was in print by books by Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, or Shoghi Effendi. I ordered all of them. And they sent those books to me later after I moved to Fort Worth. And they said, Mr. McCants, we didn't have one of the books you had ordered, and we've enclosed the following little book, which was a book of all the meaning of these Persian and Arabic terms that you read in the Baha'i writing. It was wonderful. I thought, well, I remember my dream. Oh, that dream. I'm going to see if ta. And sure enough, the word ta in their language means the in Tehran. So I said, my dream means something. Now, my background is Jewish Christian, right, because it's Christian. The Tehran, Ben Ra, what's Ben mean? Remember a movie called Ben-Hur? It means son of, and that's Jewish. The Tehran, son of Ben Rock. What's rock mean? I read some answer question. Abdu'l-Baha says when Christ referred to Peter that time, he said, and upon this rock I will build my church. Then Abdu'l-Baha said, this means, rock means the true faith of God. So my dream meant the Tehran son of the true faith of God, and it was revealed to me by Gabriel, which is very meaningful to the Persian Baha'is. Well, it meant everything to me. It gave me faith. And then I immediately, this wonderful, wonderful woman, Ruth Moffat, was a great teacher. And she had been on pilgrimage, and the guardian told her to her face, you have the gift of confirming people in the faith. And she came to town. And my brother at that time had become interested with me, and we both went to her class. And we went there for a week, every day for a week, she taught us. And she confirmed me in the faith in that sense. And then right after I got out of her class, she had to make a little trip down to Crockett, Texas, to an African-American college to make a talk. And she took me with her. And so I went with her, and she had me to make about a little 5-minute presentation along with her talk, as the first talk I ever gave as a Baha'i with Ruth Moffat. And I still pray for her. She's passed on. But she was a wonderful person, and she really helped me become confirmed in the faith. I would not have been a Baha'i had not the book Some Answered Questions existed. It answered all the basic church questions I had. And anybody who may be listening to this tape who's a Christian background, want to know more about what Baha'i faith about, read Some Answered Questions, because nearly half the book is about Christian questions, almost half of the book. And it just, right to my need, it spoke to me. And I still love that book. We refer to it often. Some Answered Questions. Well, there were very few Baha'is, if you recall. And the big interest at that time was sending pilgrims to open up countries. You know, there was great interest. I knew a few Baha'is in Dallas and a few in Fort Worth. We didn't have many. And the interest was to get Florence Mayberry, a famous Baha'i later, even in Haifa. It was over the NSA. She came to town, and the NSA was pushing, because they were given this goal from Haifa to send pilgrims all over. The Guardian had pushed it. If you read his last letter to the American NSA, these goals were to send out all these pioneers all over the world. And we were doing that. We were finding people could go, and we settled pioneers almost in every country in the world, which you will find. See, at my time, there were almost no countries with any Baha'is, very few. But there were a few countries with a few Baha'is, but now every country in the world has Baha'is. Well, I was on the NSA for a year. Well, I was travel teaching, and I was going back and forth. I had a job in Bradenton, Florida as a teacher, 7th grade teacher. And then after 2 years, I moved to Atlanta. And Mr. Kadem, the hand of the cause, used to come down to a summer school, or winter school, actually it was, in Frogmore, South Carolina, which is over there on the coast of South Carolina. And Mr. Sears' hand of the cause came one year there. And I went there several years, and it was extremely inspiring. And most all of the Baha'is in that area were African American. And Mr. Kadem would come and have dinner with us at a restaurant, that kind of thing. So from that experience, it confirmed me in being a Baha'i, and I wanted to develop. So I moved to Atlanta and took a job setting up this government program, Job Corps, in 7 states. And while there, NSA was pushing so hard for these pioneers. I knew I couldn't go and be a pioneer, and I had no money for that. So I decided I would go back to school, and I got a good job that enabled me to work and go to school at University of North Carolina. And
What year did you get elected to the NSA?
Geez, the first time, I'd have to look that up myself. It's the last part of that. It's in the 90s. I don't remember when it was, somewhere along in there. No, it wasn't daunting because the Baha'is were very, very close then, and I was the only Southerner on it. And they really wanted to teach African Americans, and I forget, God forgive me, his name, he used to be on the House of Justice, what was his name? He was Secretary of the NSA at that time. He was a Jamaican, actually. He wasn't from this country. Glenford Mitchell. I think he's still alive, but he's in bad health now. But he was secretary, and they were interested in opening up the faith. I was the only person in the South. So I started traveling everywhere from Texas to North Carolina to Key West, Florida. I stayed on the road all the time. And then they wanted me, Mr. Sears, I had been appointed just before I got elected to the NSA. Mr. Sears had appointed me an auxiliary board member. And then later, he moved to Africa and wanted me to come there as his executive board member, and I went there and was in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'll tell you an interesting story because I'll never forget it. We went to a big conference in Kampala, and we were living in Nairobi, but we went to this conference. Mr. Fullerton came there from the House of Justice, and I met Enoch Olinga for the first time. And they started a lot of African Baha'is came from Kenya down there, and they were playing these drums on the floor, beating on the drums. And he got so moved by it himself that he got up and he grabbed a zebra skin that was on the wall and wrapped it around himself and started dancing. I'll never forget how thrilling it was. Because, he had that horrible death later on. He was living in the house of Mr. Ballyhoosie, the hand of the cause, and these people came and killed him and his wife. But I met those people at that time. So Bill Sears at that time became ill, and we had to come back to this country to leave Africa and come back to the United States.
How long were you in Africa?
I was there with Bill about maybe a year and a half, something like that, not long. But I got enough to know that I wanted to pioneer. And so when I came back, I stayed on the NSA for a year or so. And every year they'd had these famous Baha'i like Dorothy Baker and those people who had pioneered. And nobody on the NSA was pioneering. And then I said, well, I'm not going to leave this whole crusade without one member of the pioneer. So I pioneered, and I chose, when I was in Hawaii, Bill Sears asked me if I would go to, he came through there one day for lunch with a friend of his and asked me to go to Samoa. So I went to Western Samoa as a pioneer and was there. And I was married in Hawaii before I left. And my first child was born in Samoa, William. And I named all my kids after the hands. My oldest boy is William Fazy McCants, after Bill Sears and Mr. Fazy. My second son is David Gibson. I named my son David Gibson, and the reason my middle name was Gibson was because when I was pioneering out in the Pacific Islands, I was in the Eastern Caroline Islands and the island of Ponape. It was very difficult, although Dr. Maharja, the hand of the cause, came there also, but to help us in our teaching there. But I was really having a rough time, and I get a letter out of the blue. I don't know why, but I had written a friend of mine who was working in Haifa, and the member of the House of Justice, Mel Gibson, I think was his full. Huh? Amos Gibson, I'm sorry, Amos Gibson, that's correct. Amos Gibson read my note to this lady I knew in Haifa, and he got up from what he was doing and drove all the way from Haifa over to the house of Baha'u'llah in Baji to say prayers at the shrine of Baha'u'llah for me. And then he wrote me the kindest letter, and I got that in Pohnpei. And not long after that, I got a second letter from him. It meant everything to me, man. I mean, you're out there all alone to think nobody in the world cares about you. And there was a wonderful woman there named Virginia Briggs, who was the Knight of Baha'u'llah for that area. And so right after that, this hand of the cause Mahajer came. I've never been around anybody in my entire life like him. He was the greatest teacher we had for bringing in masses of people. But we went to this small little town on Pohnpei, just a small place. And these women went to this church. So he went to the church. And then he made the women, they followed their customs. Always he followed their custom. He set all the women in the back. And we had the Knight of Baha'u'llah for the Guam, Marianas Islands, and Virginia Briggs for these islands. And they were both there. He set them in back with the women. And we had this wonderful Baha'i still alive in California somewhere. They named Harlan Lang, was pioneering there in Pohnpei, along with Virginia Briggs. And so he set this table up front, and he sat in front facing the audience, and the minister, he sat right by him facing the audience. The minister had two stewards in his church, so he sat them on the end of the table facing this way, facing Harlan Lang, and I facing him back this way. And when they'd ask him a question, he would answer it. Or if they asked one of the stewards a question, then he'd have Harlan and me, or Harlan and me to answer on this. So it's back and forth like it, very organized. And we had wonderful results of it. And so I left that really little island near there. I went immediately from that meeting to that. And no joke, this is a Catholic church. And while I was sitting in the meeting in the Catholic church, I enrolled a person in the faith sitting by me. It was funny, but we were all full of the Spirit because Dr. Mahajer had released it. I'll never forget how wonderful and what a wonderful teacher he was. And so the hands meant everything because they would come through, encouraging people all over the world. They went to every country. Bill Sears came and all that stuff. But Collis Featherstone died in Nepal. I think he's buried in Nepal, actually. I was in Samoa 2 years. After that, I came back from Samoa. While I was in Samoa, His Highness Malietoa was the king of Samoa. And while I was in Samoa, he enrolled in the faith. But basically because he was so attracted, and Bill Sears was there. And he was a wonderful man. He didn't live so long after he became a Baha'i, but he was the first person, a male person like a king, because the Queen of Romania, had become a Baha'i. Samoa is an outside place. I mean, people love the outside. They have meetings and buildings and stuff, but they are wonderful people, but they are very proud of their heritage. You see, as I mentioned, I taught the faith in the Caribbean, but those people have all come there in the last 200 years, like in this country. The Indians that originally there are mostly all gone, but there are a few of them left in Panama. But most of the Indian islands are gone, but that's not true in these islands in the Pacific. You go there, and their culture, like in Samoa, they know is over 3,000 years old, man. Now, you're dealing with a bunch of people, like in this country, you talk about George Washington or something 200 years ago, big deal. How about talking to people who are descendants of people 3,000 years? And that's who you're dealing with. And they are very, very proud people in Samoa. And they have very strong cultural habits. Like if you go to the meeting of these chiefs, they're all sitting around in a circle on the floor, and you got to sit on the floor. And they fold their legs, you got to fold your legs. And the whole bit, you do it their way. You don't walk in front of them either, man. It's a very strong cultural tradition to hang on to. That's the way it was when I was. I don't know what it's like now, but they really respected their traditions, and you had to do it or you can just leave. And so I had learned from Dr. Mahajer, you do it their way. I was living earlier when I met him. I was in Guam, in the Marianas Island, living in a nice home. And he sat in chairs there. But when we went to Pohnpei, we sat on the floor like they did. So he followed their customs. But it had a medium influence, not that much, no. He was not going to be shaking up, the tree of the culture or anything like that. It's too strong a culture for that. And he had great, great respect for their ways and their cultures. So, but for the Baha'is, it was a big deal, yeah.
So then after Samoa, what would happen after Samoa? What did you do after Samoa?
Well, I had to get a job, so I came back and I took a job traveling. I had met this people in Hawaii, and I got a job with an organization there that had people traveling, setting up healthcare programs all over the Pacific Islands. And I took that job, and I traveled all those islands of the Pacific, setting up little healthcare programs where they never had even a nurse before. We set up a little clinic out in this little island, and so forth. And it was fun for me. I loved doing it. Met all those people and got to see people I would never have known otherwise, but being paid to do it too. So it was, I would be maybe in this island 2 weeks or 1 week or something, setting up a little clinic and then can go back and visit them later. It was fun. I enjoyed it very much because I could never have gone to those islands had I not done it. Yeah, I came back to the States and had to get work here, so I did that. And then I was elected to NSA, and I served over 16 years. And we had wonderful Baha'is on the NSA then. And I'm still very close to some of them. In fact, Joanna Conrad was on the NSA when I got off of it, by the time I got off of it. And so was Robert Henderson. And I'm still very close friends to both of them and write to them every week just about. And it's very real, that kind of friendship, because you have to deal with some tough questions that the average Baha'i doesn't have to. And it, local assembly can't handle it. Some it's bumped up to the NSA. And sometimes the secretary of the NSA has to go to Haifa to get answers too. In fact, if you're interested, the House of Justice, we had serious problems when I first got on it and wanted to set up teaching programs here. And the House called us to Haifa, the whole NSA. And we wanted to go in February. And the House wrote back and said, no, 2 of our members won't be here. You come in April, which was wonderful. So they took the whole NSA there for a week. And we arrived on a Monday, and they said, pray. We prayed. And then on Tuesday, the whole House met us at the Shrine of the Bab, and we prayed in those shrines together. And then we met. And what they did, this is really interesting. Ali Nachavani, at that time, I don't know what they do now, but at that time, a member of the House would serve as chairman of the House during the meeting for a week, then another next week, and they rotated that chair. But the week we were there, Ali Nachavani was chairman. And so we came to the upstairs office where the House's office, where they meet for their meeting. And he shook our hands, each one of us, and welcomed them. This huge round table up there. And so NSA member, House member, NSA member, House member, all around that table. And so he said, we want you to say whatever is in your heart. Not about what they called us there to talk about. And for 2 days, I've never seen so many tears shed. And you're on the NSA with people, but you don't really know them that well. Man, we learned to love each other in that meeting because every one of us shed tears. And old Farouz, because there was a member that he said, well, I'm not going to cry. He had tears in his eyes. I'm telling you, we all cried. And you let Pat Locke, the mother of Kevin Locke, everybody knows Kevin now, but his mother was on the NSA, and she shed so many tears talking about what she suffered in Roman Catholic schools. They made her go to those schools and took away she couldn't even speak her own language in those schools. And she cried about how it had hurt her. And still, even as a member of the NSA, there's such prejudice amongst the Indians. She was from Lakota Indian background, as I recall. And the Crow Indians were over in Montana. They didn't like her even when she was on the NSA. It's just so much prejudice in all the different groups. You get to know them around the world. Everybody has your prejudices you got to deal with. And of course, if you go to those different countries, you got to be aware of it or you can't do anything. But it was a different world back then than it is now. I don't know what it'd be like now, but they were wonderful people on the NSA. And all of them, and Billy Roberts, I'm still friends with Billy Roberts. He visits me when he comes down here. And he and one of the members had a big clash one day and blah, 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 but now they were friends, you know. Everybody got over it. We saw the people get over their anger and stuff. And it was wonderful because you can't do the work on it, say, if you're angry with somebody. You just can't. You got to get it out of your system. And that's what the house did to heal the whole NSA when we were over there. And we came back, we were just like that, man. We really had a wonderful, wonderful NSA, you know.
Obviously, you've been on pilgrimage before.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about your first experience?
Yes, I went there in 1964, my first pilgrimage. That's an interesting experience for me. And there were two hands there. But the one that was closest to me was Mr. Fazey. I met him for the first time. And he encouraged me in my teaching. And for the rest of his life, he wrote me every month of his life till he died. And I have all those letters. And as I told you, my oldest boy is named William, after Bill Sears and William Fazey, because Mr. Fazey was the most loving man I ever met. And I met his son, actually, when I went to Australia, who had been on the NSA of Australia, as I recall. But Mr. Fazey was a remarkable human being. I can't put it into words as to how much his letters meant to me. And where he was traveling around the world, he'd always write me. Can you imagine that? After all those years. And I met him on that first pilgrimage. That's where I met him.
What did you think? I mean, did you know who he was?
No, I didn't know anything about the hands till I met him.
How'd you meet him?
I met him in Haifa. There were two there at that time, and he was there. The other one, I can't remember his name right now, but he was a hand, and I was not close to him. But the hands that I was closest to was Bill Sears and Mr. Kadem, Collis Featherstone, and Dr. Mahajer. Now, I met a wonderful hand that you can read about in the history books, Agnes Alexander. She opened the whole Eastern world to the Baha'i faith in Japan. I met her not long before she died in Hawaii, and she spent the whole afternoon telling me about her earlier experiences. And she didn't know much about what was going on right there, but she remembered everything else just perfectly like it was yesterday, telling me about Abel Baha'i and what this. It was a wonderful experience to talk with her because she was walking history, you know. She's one of only two people mentioned in the tablets of the Divine Plan, she and Martha Root. So she, as I recall. But that was a wonderful experience to be able to do that. And I met her, but the hands made my life to be accurately, because I was a board member with Bill Sears and an executive board member with him in Africa. I was a board member when I came back here. Then I was elected to the NSA. I was no longer a board member, but the NSA let me do something that's interesting. I can tell you this. For 8 years, I traveled all these southern states from North Carolina to Key West, Florida, to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I traveled those states back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and knew every major Baha'i active in those states. I knew them all. We didn't have that many back then, you know, so I knew them very well. And there were a lot of wonderful, wonderful people you meet like that I just had the opportunity to meet and be with. I still communicate with one or two of them that are still alive. There's a Baha'i who has a jewelry store. He's retired, but his son runs it down in Key West still. I met met in Hawaii, and he moved to Key West and been there ever since. A wonderful man. But it's, you don't meet those people if you don't travel teach. And I met them because I was travel teaching. But yeah, Kanum is more than an interesting person, but she was a tough teacher too. I mean, in Haifa when I was there. In fact, I had dinner at her home with her one day. I don't talk about it much. It was a wonderful, wonderful day. I had a meeting with her, and she was a very direct person. Her mother, you see, there's a Baha'i writing, page 220 something in Kitab-i-Igan, I think, where it talks about no man knoweth what his own end shall be. How often at the last hour of life you can lose your faith and fall into the nethermost fire. So no man knoweth what his own end is going to be. And even the worst of the sinners, it goes on to say, can attain the essence of faith and ascend to the concourse or not at the last moment. But, you know, from my background, I was raised in a Christian background where you're saved, right? Nobody can say that because you don't know what your own end's going to be. From my view, that's just my understanding. And the reason I think that's so strong is she really believed it. Her mother had believed it all her life, and she grew up with that fear. She talks about it on some talk I saw on TV recently. But she grew up with that fear, and she talked about it. And she told the guardian one time, she said, after they were married, she said, I'm so glad now I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm married to you. And he said, he held up his hand. He said, no, that's between you and God. I can't do anything to help you. So I thought that was funny, but it's not funny if you're of that belief system. But anyway, people have their different understandings of the Baha'i writing, their personal understandings. And a lot of them are influenced by your own life and where you've been and who you've known and what they thought had. I'll give you an example. When Dr. Mahajer was dying in Central America, I think he's buried in Peru, one of those state countries down there. Wherever he is, his closest friend, I forget his name right now, he had a heart attack, as I understand it, or a stroke, and fell on the ground. And his friend saw him saying something, so sort of almost his face was in the dirt, and he was saying the greatest name as he passed away. Yabahalaba, Yabahalaba. And that's the way he entered the next concourse. And then I had a dream about him later, about the passing of Dr. Mahajer. I'll never forget the dream. It's as clear as I had it last night. He came back to me in the dream, and he said, Jack, they needed me to help with work up here, teaching up here, so I've been called here to teach. It was clear. I'm sure to some degree it's true, because that's the dream. And it was so real to me. And I'm very grateful because I felt so close to it.
What do you think about like teaching the faith like now, today, in today's day and age?
Oh, to be quite candid about it, I don't know anything about it because I'm not well. I have to stay at home. I don't travel anymore. Haven't been able to for years. And as you know, it's a different world. See, when I became a Baha'i, there were no all this data stuff you have now. Everybody, even little kids going to first grade learning computers. None of that existed. It was person to person. And the thing that I so loved about most of the hands that I knew is they were the greatest listeners I've ever seen, and they taught your heart. As I mentioned earlier, from the head to the heart is a long road. And they taught both the head and the heart, but they taught you, and they loved you, and it was real, man. It was not fake. They really love you. And I never forget that because it changes your life. So that's the main thing. Well, this is probably, some folks say this is negative, no, but the Guardian talked about the destruction of America. Florence Mayberry was there in April before he died in November. He was very blunt with what he told her, and she shared it with me, which I won't share all of that stuff. But this country is going through its own destruction now, as anybody can see. You have just groups of people constantly hating each other. Here, and I live in Houston, on the streets of Houston, almost daily people are shooting people with pistols. That never happened when I was young, you see. I traveled all over these states. Nobody was shooting people with pistols. And now it's crazy because you can go to these countries in Europe and none of them have pistols and stuff on the street. But in this country you do, and you have so much hate. And you have these different groups of people coming through the border and from South America and all of these countries. And there's so much hatred in the streets everywhere we go. When I live in Houston, Texas, we have people here literally from every country in the world in Houston, Texas. And actually what is interesting mostly is there are little restaurants for every kind of people in the world in Houston. From little countries you never heard of, they got their restaurant here. And it's interesting to live here. The earth is but one country, mankind is citizen. Well, Houston is the best example of it in the United States. And we have lots of clashes between people here in Houston. And you see the different, Abdul-Wahab, when he was in this country, he spoke about the problem resolving between the African Americans and the whites. We still have the problem. It's being resolved slowly, I guess. But the country is being ripped apart. And there are people literally who hate people here now, just from different groups. And the destruction of America, in one sense, it appears to me, I'm just an old man out of touch, but it appears to me that it's happening now. And everybody's in touch with everybody all over the world. You see something happen to me in this country, then it spreads all over the world. And it's sad because I love my country and I hate to see it torn apart. But I do know the Guardian told Florence Mayberry that if it continued the way it's going, the American Baha'is would be refugees to other countries. And that's sad because it's still in our hands. It doesn't have to be. But the Baha'is are sort of quiet on the side now. They're not really alive. And at least from my experience, I'm not really that much in touch. But saying to young people, you see, their world is a world of data. They're in touch with people all over the world. It's no big deal to them to be talking to somebody around the world on computers and stuff. That did not exist when I became a Baha'i. And so I grew up as a Baha'i in a different world. Now, what I would say to those young people is what I would say to anyone. There are two statements of Shoghi Effendi I'll quote. He said, "The faith of Baha'u'llah is a priceless gem of divine revelation, enshrining the Spirit of God and incarnating His purpose for mankind in this age." And then for the Christians, he said, "The Lord of the kingdom, Jesus Christ returned in the glory of the Father, has ascended His throne and assumed the scepter of a world-embracing, indestructible sovereignty." Well, that's true all over the world. Now we have Baha'is in every country and NSAs working all over the world. And so I would say to young people, you're going to live in a difficult, changing world. We can't stop all this hatred in America immediately. But if it's going to have any future in the world, you're going to have to learn to be close to God. Now, I have known, and I know now, some Christians who are very close to God, but they cannot be as close to God as a Baha'i if he's really close to God, because they don't have His message. If you want to know what God wants the world to do now, you have to be a Baha'i. Just that simple. And you have to study His writings and read the letters from the House of Justice and what they want you to do. And if you're a young person and you're really going to survive heart, mind, and soul, from my viewpoint, you have no choice but to be a Baha'i. You have to learn to be a Baha'i. And it's a slow process. You can't just learn to be a Baha'i overnight. And I'll tell you, seriously, it's difficult to get along with some of the people who are Baha'is because they haven't been Baha'i long. And they've got the habits they bring into the faith when they become Baha'i. And so you're learning to live together as a oneness of mankind. And you come from such different backgrounds in this country. And to bring you together into one little community and to love each other, it's a growth process. and comes day by day. And what it will teach you to do if you're going to survive, you'll learn to pray. And the great thing about the Baha'i is they have hundreds of prayers revealed by the manifestation of God and his son, Abdu'l-Baha. They're perfect prayers. We've never had that before. Christ gave us one prayer, our Father who art in heaven. Everybody knows it. Baha'is have hundreds of prayers. For every single purpose in the world, we have prayers revealed by God Almighty himself. Now that's amazing, man. You think about it. Every one of them is the Word of God. You think about that, what it really means. The Holy Spirit enshrined in the human language is what it means. And you have access to it for every need you have. Now, young people, I say to you, you need to learn to pray, or you're not going to survive. That's what I would say.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you'd like to touch on, or you'd like to mention, or you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would like to say to the Baha'is, if they listen, you're not very much involved in teaching in this country, from what I can see and hear and read. And right now, you need to be in touch with the Holy Spirit. And you cannot be in touch with it if you're not teaching. You can't do it. If you're in touch with the Spirit of God, he moves you to teach. Even if it's just, Abdu'l-Baha only asks you to bring one person a year into the faith. That's all he ever asked, as far as I know. Anybody can teach one person a year. I don't care who you are. If you can grunt, see lightning, and hear thunder, you can teach one person. It's that simple, because you have these prayers from the Baha'i faith. And you can bring one person into the faith. Now, who that is, I don't know. But if you really beg God to lead you to this person that you can bring into the faith, he will lead you to them as sure as you are hearing my words. And then work with them all year long. Help them to enroll in the faith, to embrace the faith. That's a simple thing. It's the main thing that I would say to the Baha'is who may listen to this tape, is God loves you. He sees you. He wants you to be close to him. In fact, he said, O Son of Spirit, veiled in my immemorial being, in the ancient eternity of mine essence, I knew my love for thee. Hence love me, that my love may reach you. You've got to love God. O Son of Spirit, love me, that I may love you. If you don't love him, you can't reach God if you don't love him. Now, how do you love God? He's in everything. If you're a musician, he loves you through the music. If you're an artist, he loves you through the art. If you're a farmer, he loves you through planting vegetables, or corn, or whatever it is you're raising, or wheat, or whatever. Whatever you do, God is involved in it, whatever it is. And I think that's wonderful to be aware of that, and that's Baha'i teaching. I'm not making it up. And I think we're not aware of that, but when, you don't live long. I'm old now, 92. But it seems like my life's gone like that. That's what I would say to anybody. Your life goes before you know it. And in the end, there you are, you're faced with eternity. And how are you going to face that? I don't know. We take it day by day. And God will guide you into the next world. And that's what you're preparing your soul for all your life, is to function in the next world. Because that's going to last as long as you can think of eternity. It goes on and on. The worlds of God are without limit. And so that's what we're preparing to function in that world. And that's what this life is about. And I can see that because a lot of the tests you have are preparing you to deal with some difficult things, And we all have tests. And if you don't deny you have tests, you're not living in reality. So I would say learn to pray and then act. That's what I would say. I think the Houston Baha'is have the best chance of anybody in the United States is to practice the earth is but one country and mankind is citizen. According to all the research that I read, Houston is the most balanced city in the United States of America, including New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Houston is the most balanced city in the world from people from all countries in the world. And Baha'is talk about love of mankind. Houston is the best city in the world to practice it. Because if you really reach out to people It's not just cases, many people are just black and white. It's people here from every country in the world. Nearly almost half the citizens is Hispanic of some country. All these people here from every country in South America you find people from. But you can find people literally from every country in the world. I don't know any city in the world, including New York City. You can find restaurants from every country in the world. And you can here in Houston, and it's no big deal. So if you want to, like I have a friend in this city called, his name is Ajit Gyani, and he likes Indian food. But some of it's so hot he can't handle it, you know. Well, you don't think about Indian food being hot, but that curry is hotter than Texas peppers, you know. And so you learn this from, I think this is maybe a simplistic view, but you learn a lot about people by what they eat. You do. If you want to teach, well, what country you want to teach today in Houston? You can go sit in that restaurant and meet them and talk with them and have a great time. And that's the truth. You can do that. Nobody's holding you back. Well, I don't know anywhere else you could do that. See, I come from a little town in East Texas. They don't have that kind of an opportunity. So it's wonderful to be in a city like Houston where they have the opportunity to reach all of these people and to teach them and to enroll them in the faith too. And then if you can become more and more active in your group meetings and all these places where you go to have your smaller meeting, right here in Houston is the best place in the United States to do it. There's nowhere in the United States like Houston. It's a remarkable city. It's over 4 million people here, man. And they keep coming from all over the world. You think about here, oh, just coming from South America, not true. They're here from everywhere. And so I think that's a remarkable opportunity, and anybody can be grateful because I've eaten and met people here I never dreamed I'd meet from some little country I never heard of. Here it is in Houston. And that's an opportunity that I'm very grateful for because I never had it before in one place. Had to travel great distances to do it. You don't in Houston. So if a person has that time, interest and wants to learn about the earth is but one country, mankind that says, come to Houston, Texas. That's what I say.